I'm curious, at what point did you realize that you had to do something uniquely different?
Like when we're barely, making ends meet and I can put on a class and make 10 grand, I'm like, whoa. So then I'm like, light bulb went off. And so many times I'm like, it could be the tool right in front of you that you're just not looking at correctly that could actually skyrocket you. First you have the trade, then you're an entrepreneur, but now you got to become a marketer. So there's a third hat that you've got to put on and understand what is working and what is not working. Artists in general are so, restaurants, it doesn't matter. They're so passionate about what they do, they will go broke before deciding to turn things around. If you're saying yes to that client, you're saying no to your kids right now. And that's a hard pill to swallow. It's so funny because so many people are scared even today to put themselves out there. But the minute I saw the power in doing that, I was like, fuck it, I don't care if I look stupid on camera or whatever. I'm just gonna get on camera and be me and share my knowledge and what I know. And if people like it, great. And so that's literally how it started.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so excited you came down. We got to meet, I think it was last week, and I got to be on your show. And
I know.
Here we are. Now I get to have you share your message with my community.
We're back.
I think it's so awesome because entrepreneurship is usually thought of as I start business, I run business, and I'm an entrepreneur. But entrepreneurism can come from so many areas and ways. And your journey of starting with an artistic craft, right? Cosmetology, hairstyling.
Right.
Most of the people who perform that think of themselves as artists, which they are. And you figured out how to entrepreneurialize that experience and turn it into so much. And now looking at where you are today, it's just, I think it's going to be eye-opening for my audience to see oh my gosh, how am I not looking at my business in a different light? You're also a mother of 5 beautiful children. You have a dynamic husband. You are a podcast host of 2 amazing shows, one that you do with your husband, which must be challenging at times.
Yeah, it's a little bit.
But I love the name, Date Your Wife Podcast. And it's just, I'm really excited to have you. It's been too long to get you here, and now that you're here, I'm honestly excited. So thank you for coming.
I love it. Well, thanks for having me here. And I will say, although I started as an artist, I never actually even wanted to be an entrepreneur. Here's what's crazy. I just wanted to be a mom and have babies, and hair was a hobby that was kind of fun. And so life throws you a different direction, and you have to kind of look at things differently. So it is possible, but I definitely had to shift from, being just the artist. And honestly, if I labeled myself just the artist, then I only operate in that lane. So I really had to really recreate, through my mindset. I'm not just an artist, and I had to turn into kind of this entrepreneur, but I didn't really want to be one.
Which is, I think, is so important because so many people don't think of themselves that way.
Right.
Because they are a hairstylist or they are a chef or they are an electrician.
Right.
And they don't realize that in order to monetize that skill, being an entrepreneur and using that kind of thinking can create that wealth and wealth creation that everyone's after. And during that time when you like you said, you wanted to be a mom, and this was a hobby and a passion, and that's how so many people build the beginning of their business, but then they get stuck. And I'm curious, at what point did you realize that you had to do something uniquely different? So you weren't just kind of me-tooing your way through the cosmetology career path?
Right. Well, for me, I had been doing hair for 10 years. I had had 2 of my kids. And it was during when the market was crashing. My husband was in mortgages. And I was just like, figure it out, babe. I'm like the mom and the hairstylist, figure it out. And it started to get worse and worse and worse and worse. And to where we lost everything. We had to short sell our home. We were probably $500,000 in credit card debt. We went from doing great when the mortgages were doing great to literally having nothing. And during this time, it was really challenging even for our marriage. I didn't even know if I was going to stay married. And I was pregnant with my second daughter and still doing hair, but it was more of a hobby. It was side money. And I remember thinking okay, I don't know if he's going to get us out of this. And I'm in this very vulnerable state because I'm literally pregnant with my second daughter. And I'm I don't know, what is my money going to provide? What is it going to produce? What am I going to do? And I had my second daughter, and things they kept getting worse and worse and worse. To the point where even the home we were renting, we stopped paying rent. It was okay, where do we want to spend our money? I think we need food, so let's spend our money there. And I kept waiting for him to kind of turn the corner or do something, but the market had crashed and he was trying to rediscover himself. And I'm okay, well, what skill do I have right in front of me? And I'm okay, it's hair. And I think that oftentimes people are thinking of their skill or their hobby as their passion. it's not the big money maker. They're like, oh, it's just something I'm passionate about or whatever. And so they don't give that tool enough credit. And so many times I'm like, it could be the tool right in front of you that you're just not looking at correctly that could actually skyrocket you. So in that moment, I'm like, okay, I have 2 kids. What am I going to do? And back then, like, no social media existed. The YouTube was just getting started. And I was like, well, I don't know where I'm going to go, but I'm going to start a brand. And like nobody started brand. It was like Vidal Sassoon, Paul Mitchell, but no, there was no like individual brands. And so I remember I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to get on YouTube and I'm going to say I created this extension method because after doing hair for 10 years, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. After doing hair for like 10 years, I figured out a very unique way to do hair extensions. And I was teaching other extension or other artists like for free, but never really considered it something I could make money with. So when I lost everything, I'm thinking like, well, I'm teaching people how to do these extensions that I've crafted up. Why don't I start charging for it? So then I started Natural Beauty Rose, the brand. So that's kind of how it all started.
The brand of the product, but the method you had kind of already, without realizing, created.
Yes, I was just like trying different things that I had learned, and I was like, oh, this works good on my hair. I'll do it on my client's hair. The funny thing is I wasn't charging hardly anything because I was just like, whatever. Like I didn't give myself enough credit for what I had created.
And I think a lot of people get stuck doing that where because you created it, you don't realize how revolutionary and different it may be, and that for everyone else, they would pay a premium for it because they need that skill, or they can monetize that skill, or it can level them up in their career.
Right.
So it's a normal thing to have that moment of, well, no one would pay me for this thing.
Yeah. It's like unworthiness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or what's the word? Not inferior or inferiority, but I'm blanking on the word I was trying to say. Where you doubt yourself.
You doubt yourself. Yeah. I guess for me, I'm like, well, I'm in this kind of rock bottom space. What do I have to lose? So then I created the brand, and I just started getting on YouTube and saying like, hey, I'm the creator of Natural Beauty Rose, and I was just being me. And back then, nobody was doing that. It was like Vidal Sassoon and very pretty and very perfect, and everything was all magazine. So here I am just like, hey, here's what I have to offer. And I started having people reach out to me, and it was just like, hey, I want to learn these extensions. I'm like, okay. And so I started having people come in. I'd be like, okay, well, I'm going to do a class because I got like 10 people interested, and literally just started teaching them extensions. And so then I'm like, oh, wow, there's more than just money in doing hair, but there's money in education. So that was the first time I think I like went into more of like an entrepreneurial mindset where I was like, okay, it's not just about hair. And I started looking at it as something as a business and not a hobby, because it was like the green light went off and I was like, oh my gosh, I can make, and at the time I think I was only charging like $1,000 per student, but for me, I'm broke. I'm like, I just got 10 grand for a day class.
That's meaningful money.
Yes. I'm like, when we're barely, making ends meet and I can put on a class and make 10 grand, I'm like, whoa. So then I'm like, light bulb went off. And it's so funny because so many people are scared even today to put themselves out there. But the minute I saw the power in doing that, I was like, fuck it. I don't care if I look stupid on camera or whatever. I'm just going to get on camera and be me and share my knowledge and what I know. And if people like it, great. And so that's literally how it started. And
I love that it started from the rock bottom, because we all have those moments where we think, unless I'm in a position financially to take these opportunities or explore it because I'm struggling to pay my bills. And maybe you're not at complete rock bottom, but you're at that paycheck to paycheck, credit card debt. I don't have time to try this or launch this but really that's the time you have to.
Yeah.
That's how you're going to get out of. And when you're at the bottom, you can't fall much further.
Right.
You really only have one way to go. So in a weird way, the bottom is almost a blessing when you're trying to recreate yourself versus when you're at the top and you're like, I have so much to lose.
It's so true. And I've been through that space even now where I'm like, oh, the businesses are running. I don't need to be there. And I went into like a depression. I was like, well, this is not how it should be either. So I've been
and then you have a track record, because if you come up with a new product or a new division or a new service or a new idea and it doesn't work, it could almost blemish your reputation because you have so much. So the bottom or the middle, and when you're fighting that's a great time to try these things and explore. And going back to the oldest example to me about what you realize and are doing is the gold rush. Most people think everyone got rich in the gold rush back hundreds of years ago when everyone went out west. The people who actually got rich were the people who sold picks and shovels, rooms for rent, services to all the people who were chasing gold. So while the gold rush might be the artistry of hairstylists, you were able to figure out a service to provide to all the people who are already doing it. So you were adding a layer of financial opportunity for yourself and differentiating in a crowded field by providing something you knew that everybody needed.
Yeah. And it's crazy too, because even in the beginning, although it was like a hobby, I realized I'm making way more money than people that are just offering like men's cuts or kids cuts or single services. And so and it was something that I was passionate about. I'm like, I have crappy hair. I tell people this all the time. I'm like, I created this out of my own willing to figure out my own hair. And so
your hair looks great.
Thank you. But in doing so, I'm like, wow, this can help so many other women. And also, even in the very beginning of my ticket price for doing extensions versus like doing these single services, I knew I could make the most money. And so it was interesting too, because I even had to elevate my brand, because in the beginning, so hand-tied hair is a type of extension hair, and it's how it's sewn together. And at the time when I started my brand, nobody was using hand-tied hair. It was the lowest selling hair on the marketplace. Like, you could go into any beauty supply and you'd get it. It was like in the back, in the corner, like nobody wanted it. And so I started my brand of Natural Beauty Rose. And one of the other big problems I found in the industry is I was like, nobody wants to pay for this cheap hair. And I'm like, but I think it's just a matter of brand positioning.
Marketing?
Yes. And because I was like, okay, I'm putting these hair extensions in my clients in 2 hours, and it looks better than these girls that are spending 10 hours putting their extensions in. They're charging the same amount. I'm just getting it done in 2 hours, and they're spending 10 hours. So immediately I'm like, but I can't charge that much because it's only taking 2 hours. I'm like, well, that's bullshit, because I'm giving them a better result. So I should actually be charging them more. So again, another light bulb went off, and I'm like, okay, so how do I take this hair that's literally the lowest selling hair in the marketplace? How do I actually make it look like the Chanel of hair extensions? And so my second brand that I started was my blog. And it was me, again, just talking about hair and fashion. But what I started doing when I was super, super broke, I would invest in small pieces. So I bought my first Chanel bag. I bought my first whatever it was. That's why I'm obsessed with fashion still to this day, because that's how I started my brand. We had no money, had lost everything. And I was like, if I sell one hair extension client this month, I can go get a Chanel bag. I know that sounds stupid, but I would use it in my marketing, and I would talk about these as being like a luxury extension, and clients, and then I tripled my prices after I started doing this, and clients, they didn't question it at all. They expected to pay this amount based off of my branding and my marketing. So I was like, oh my gosh, like another light bulb went off.
Well, and according to my wife, all of those high-end fashion bags that I've bought her appreciate in value. So it's an investment,
I know, exactly.
according to her.
It was a write-off.
Yeah, it's a right. And they grow. But I think you just hit on another point, which is, for entrepreneurship, a chasm we all have to mentally cross, right? That, oh, it should take 10 hours. I found a way to do it in 2. I have to charge less.
Right.
Well, go look at airplane flights. Why are direct flights more expensive than the ones with the stops? Because you're providing a service. No one wants to sit in a chair for 10 hours.
Right.
You are providing me a convenient opportunity to get the same thing done faster. My time is worth more money.
Right.
Therefore, you have earned the right to charge me more. And so instead of us all at home going, well, yeah, I can do it faster, so I can't charge as much, because it's the opposite.
Right.
That's the selling point. Do you want to waste an entire 10 hours sitting in a chair when I can get you better results in 2 hours?
Exactly.
Yeah, there's a premium, but how much is your time worth?
Right.
I'm sure it's worth more than the difference.
Yeah. I think that was a mental shift that I had to make for myself, though.
No, yeah.
And a lot of artists do. It's like, oh, time is money. And I'm like, no, the skill is what they're paying for.
That's right.
So I was like, okay, I can not justify, but this is what I'm going to charge. And the minute I did that, clients, like I said, they started coming in, and they didn't second guess it. And I was like, wow, okay, what else is next,
And at what point did you kind of realize you were an entrepreneur? Because your story is kind of like, well, I didn't, and then I figured it out, and then I figured that out, and then, like you said, like, what can I, and then it just, the glass ceilings that you thought were in front of you, you just kept plowing through?
Yeah, I think, I honestly felt like an entrepreneur the minute I started my brand.
Okay.
Like I almost felt when people would be like, what do you do? I was like, oh, I do hair. Because it's an industry that's very looked down upon. It's getting better now. But, I've been doing hair for over 20 years. And it was like, oh, cute, you do hair? Like, it was like I didn't even want to tell people. And so now I say I do hair by trade, but I'm an entrepreneur.
Yeah, sure.
And so I kind of realized that in the beginning, like the minute I decided to launch my brand of Natural Beauty Rose, I was like, oh, this is just the tool to get there. And so for me, I started operating like a businesswoman. I started doing my numbers, doing everything totally different. Because in the past, when I thought of myself as an artist, or it was like a hobby, I didn't track numbers. I didn't care. In fact, I loved my clientele so much, I was like willing to do their hair for free. I loved the transformation so much that I was like, almost felt bad charging them. But when you're broke and you have no money and you're deciding if you should buy your kids food, things change.
Yeah, you got to charge. And you should charge.
Yeah.
You should get paid for the value you are providing
Right.
in whatever you do. And
Right.
I don't think that I would challenge the notion that I think hairstylists were that trade is looked down upon. I just think it's like construction as well, right? One of these trades where the barrier to entry is lower. So there's just a lot of people you know in the field, and there aren't enough differentiators that are
Right.
creating what you're doing, right?
Right.
Where you are changing it as opposed to just being like, oh, I'm a waiter. Well, there's a waiter, and then there's the waiter at the 5-star,
Right.
3-time Michelin restaurant, right?
Right.
They're providing an experience. And I think that we all have to remember that if you're a cosmetologist and you are not working at a Supercuts where you just wait for the customer to come in,
Right.
you have your own clientele, you're an entrepreneur.
Right.
If you're renting a chair, you're an entrepreneur.
Right.
You have a business.
But I wish I could speak to my artists that way, because even though they own businesses, they don't operate like an entrepreneur. So they and again we go to hair school and then we're just thrown into this entrepreneurial world, but they're primarily artists. And so that was like one of the things, again, I was like super passionate about, is like I started teaching them at the extensions, but I also was kind of like, well, you guys, this is a numbers game. Like you can't just like, one of the things in the hair industry, it's like, what's the going rate? Like that's how they make their pricing. They're like, oh, what are you charging, Sally, next door? And they're like, oh, I'll charge that too. And I'm like, no, you should, like, what is the cost of your color? What is the cost of this? What is your highest service? But my brain has always worked that way when I decided that I was an entrepreneur. When I was an artist, I didn't care. I was just like, whatever. And so I think a lot of hairstylists, they don't put on that entrepreneur hat.
And they need to.
And so that became another thing that I was passionate about inside of teaching NBR. And I started offering business trainings and things like that. And that's what really, all of a sudden, NBR became elite, because I was giving them more training. So I realized like the value in training and just getting them to put on those two different hats,
That's right. Oh, absolutely. And I think that is so important, not only for everyone listening who is trying to apply, okay, how can I do this in my business? But what you just said, which is the old cliche is, all artists, whether they're painters or
Right.
they're broke till they die, and then their paintings become worth something because they're not around anymore. Because artists are artists. They don't think like business.
Right. But they can.
But they have to.
They have to.
Right?
Yeah.
You have to do both. It's kind of like sometimes if you have 2 kids, you got to give both of them your full attention.
Yeah.
And you can't say, well, this kid is my only kid. No, you have a second one.
Right.
And so if you are a business owner or an entrepreneur and you are a cosmetologist or pick your trade, you are. And so you must invest in yourself. You must learn the tools, the P&Ls, marketing,
Right.
how to price right, how to set yourself apart. And then also what other marketable skills can you invest in, like your hair product and how
Right.
you do the extensions, that process that separates you in a crowded market in your city. Because if I'm the only hairstylist that has that capability, I can market that.
Right.
World-renowned NBR, come here. It's the only place in San Diego you can get
offers it.
or in my community.
Right.
And if there is more people, as you continue to grow, I'm sure I will have competition, but
Yeah.
I could set myself out like you did, which is, what else can I do?
Right.
Maybe it's
Right.
Chanel bags, maybe it's a different other experience, which you're providing as well. And that leads to the next transition for you, which was the education series.
Yeah. So yeah, I started educating. It's crazy. I started with a shadowing program, because
Shadowing program.
so it was like a one-on-one coaching program. Because what I found in marketing is I would put like on my blog or my website, I'd be like, hey, I'm doing a class, and I didn't know how to market it. So I was like, oh, nobody's interested. That's weird. But I would randomly get emails of somebody who'd say like, I'm interested in your class. When's your next class? And I was like, oh, I don't know how to market this to fill a class, but if I can offer a one-on-one shadowing program. And so it just made sense. I'm like, I would have them come in and model a couple days of me doing hair extensions. And then I would teach them on a doll head and that kind of thing. And then it was crazy as I started doing more and more of that. Then I was like, okay, or I just started doing a lot of my personal branding and talking about hair and doing the YouTube, and just became a marketer, right? Because it's like first you have the trade, then you're an entrepreneur, but now you got to become a marketer. So there's a third hat that you've got to like put on and understand like what is working and what is not working. So just because I listed a class on my website doesn't mean people are going to come.
Sure.
So I kind of went into doing just tons of promotion on YouTube and Pinterest and everywhere I could. And I started doing these small classes, and then these small classes turned into, like 10 people and then 20 people, to the point where then we were like renting hotel space to do 30 people. And then it was like, oh my God, we were at the point where we were doing conventions of like 200 to 500 stylists. It was crazy.
Wow.
And so that's when I was like, okay, this is kind of like, this is bigger than I even imagined. And it was around that time that I was like, what else? And I've always wanted to start my own hairline. And at the time I was pregnant with my third daughter, and I was like, I'm like, okay, so I'm like pregnant. Should I stop doing hair? I'm in this like weird mom transition, but I can't ignore like what's going on and the feelings I'm having. And I'm like, no, like I've got to like keep serving the hairstylists. Like, what do I need to do next? And when I was pregnant with my third daughter, I decided to launch a hairline. And like I said, I've been using a type of hair called hand-tied hair for over 20 years. And there was things that I liked and things that I didn't like. And I'm like, oh God, if I could just custom create off of my experience, then everybody wins. But I also was like, okay, the biggest thing I'm spending money on in my salon is hair. I'm like, so if I can have my own hairline, we're going to be a lot more profitable. So I ended up partnering up with a company, and we created Isla hand-tied hair, which, funny story, I was like running on the treadmill one day, and they called me, they're like, you need to name your hairline tomorrow. And I was pregnant at the time. I was like, tomorrow? And I wanted my baby's name to be Isla. And I was like, go with Isla. And they were like, okay. And then backstory, she when I had her, she came out with like 2 inches of platinum hair. None of my kids did. And I was like, yep, there's a reason my hairline was named after you.
Is her name Isla?
Her name's Isla. So I named my hairline after her, but I was like pregnant with her. And it was just like this random. They're like, we need a name by tomorrow. I'm like, here you go. But yeah, so then I started my hairline, and then I realized like this is the tool to help the artist, right? This is, now they've got the tool of NBR, but now they've got the hair that goes with it. So that's where right now is like my biggest revenue is my hairline. And so now, like, although I still love doing hair, my brain's like, what else is next? And I like product lines and this and that. I'm sure you know that's how you start, and that's how you vertically scale everything. You're like, oh, I've got the buildings and I've got the bowls and I've got you have to find all of that and put it into one house. So I'm still on the journey of like figuring that out.
You're always going to be on the journey.
Yeah.
The journey never ends.
Yeah.
Even Elon Musk is still on the journey.
Right.
I mean, you see he's still innovating, creating. Now they're doing Tesla robots.
I know.
Right? Because the world's always moving. And if you're playing the game for $1, you'll lose.
Right.
If you're playing the game because you love it, you love the innovation, the ideation, the scale, the challenges, the pitfalls, the wins. It's the game in the process of the game. And I think that whether you realize it or not, you light up when you're talking about how this all came to be. So you love the game.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I was telling you, like, so my fourth daughter, I was like, oh, it's good. Everything's set up. I don't need to be involved in my business. And I was like, I got kind of depressed. I was like, oh my gosh. And I'm thinking, this is my fourth daughter. I like got into fitness competitions. I was in great shape, and I like had this beautiful family and house and all these things. And I was like, why am I sad? And I was like, because I'm not in the game. And that's really what this is all about, is innovating and creating and expanding, because the more you do that, the more impact you have and the more you grow as an individual. So I'm like, oh my God. So I realized just this last year, actually, that's why I relaunched my podcast, is I'm like, oh, this is what I love doing. I love the growth. I love expanding. I love the innovation and all those things. And so I think that when you're on that path, it's exciting.
I mean, it no pun intended, it lights my hair on fire.
Yeah.
I tried the retirement thing.
Yeah,
I just can't do it.
Yeah.
It's just like, I want to be in the game. And when the game's too boring, I need to do another one.
Exactly.
And that's the fun. And I think everyone should take a look at what they're doing, because you spend so much time of your life. If you think about your day in 3 8-hour blocks, right? You have 8 hours of work, 8 hours of sleep if you're one of those people who can actually sleep that long, and then that 8 hours of, let's call it, family and you time.
Right.
So if you're going to spend 8 hours a day in your career, don't you want to push the envelope to go where you can? And if you're an artist and you think of yourself that way, and maybe a lot of hairstylists are hearing this and saying, I just don't think of myself as an entrepreneur. I don't have that brain. I would challenge them to reach out to someone like you, right? And say, okay, maybe I don't have the skills, or I don't believe I have them yet. I got to learn them. Yeah. Because while entrepreneurship has some natural ways that make it easier for people. If you're good in sales, you're probably going to be a little bit better. Right. If you're a natural marketer, you're probably going to see a success a little faster, because you can promote your brand, or whatever product and service you're offering. But you can learn so much of these things. I mean, just what we talked about, where if I was a hairstylist and I'm like, okay, how can I do this? I'm not an entrepreneur. Well, maybe I can become certified in your style of extensions. And then I can have this product, which allows me to be different. And who knows where it goes from there, because what I may then learn is I would then reach out to you and say, you know what? I'm doing this in San Diego. You don't have anyone else but me here. What do you suggest? How can I help grow this thing in San Diego, right? Or maybe it's I now work at multiple salons and I'm the person and I redistribute your hair. I mean, I would come to you with ideas. That wouldn't come to me until I get into it.
Well, it's crazy too. I would say the biggest thing that artists struggle with is they burn out behind the chair. And I get it, because artists in general are so, restaurants, it doesn't matter. Like, they're so passionate about what they do, they will go broke before like deciding to turn things around. And it's off of like a little bit of like ego of like, oh my gosh, I can't let my salon go. And I get it, because I've worked with so many artists, and I'm like, you're already dying. Like, you have to let it go and rebuild. If you don't, you're just going to sit in this space of like, I'm trying to save my salon, but that model's not even working.
Well, I think that their challenge is their thinking is wrong. They think they make their money when they're behind the chair.
Yes.
Just like some people think a professional athlete makes their money when they play the game. They don't.
Right.
They make their money before they show up to the game because the game is to demonstrate their skills.
Right.
And so if you're an artist who is spending all your time behind the chair, as an entrepreneur, I would say to you, you've got to stop working in your business and start working on your business, which means if you don't have the sales capability and training, work on it. Marketing, work on it. Supply chain, work on it.
Yep.
Like all of those things, that's more important than the chair. It's almost better to cancel one client a day
and work on the other side.
And work on your business and use that time because you'll make more money when you figure out how to grow your business. So you spend, or at least monetize your time behind the chair better.
Well, it's so interesting you say that because like I had created a model just for myself where I'm like, I was working 5 days a week. I was burning out. My 2 kids never saw me. I was like dropping them off at school and then coming home when they were already in bed. And I was like, this is stupid. Like I had all this mom guilt and I was like, if I'm just going to, this is when Garrett and I, like things started producing, we were doing better. So I didn't necessarily have to work, but I was very passionate about it. I remember thinking like, this is stupid. Like having all this mom guilt, why am I doing this? And then I'm like, wait, this is about restructuring in my own boundaries. And so what I did is I went through my books. I'm like, where am I making the most money? I cut out services. I went from working 5 days to 3 days a week. And like I said, I tripled my income and I was like, oh my God. And then I took those 2 extra days. I wasn't just hanging out. I took those 2 extra days to work on my blogging, my marketing and my emails and all that. And I was like, and that's when my brand started to explode. And also my profitability behind the chair went up. And so that's one of the things when I'm training artists, I'm like, how many days a week are you working? I'm like, where is your marketing? How are you figuring out what's working? Do you even know if you're making money or are you just like running on fumes at this point, you know?
Well, so and you just nailed something else, which is very important right there for hairstylists and entrepreneurs. That by going from 5 days to 3, you reduce the supply of your availability. Yes. So now you charge more and some people won't be able to afford it and they're going to drop off, but you don't have as many slots. So you actually need to funnel down to who are your best group of clients.
Right.
And if you make the same amount of money in 3 days that you were in 5, you have 2 days to work on your business, 2 days to do those other things.
Right.
And so it's contrary to a lot of people's thoughts. Like I get this all the time from franchisees of Everbold when we are going to raise prices when we had to, or even other businesses that I help out. And they're like, yeah, I'm just afraid if I raise my prices, I'm going to lose some clients.
I know.
And I always say to them, okay, well, let's play the game. How much are you going to raise your prices? 10%. Okay, so 10%, you're going to raise your prices. What percentage of your customers do you think you're going to lose? And they'll go, I don't know, 5%? I'm like, then you're ahead.
You're ahead.
You're ahead.
Yeah.
If you lose more than 10%, then you're behind and you raise your prices too much. But prices increase. That's life.
Right.
Show me anything in the world where prices don't increase.
Right.
Everybody had a grandfather who said, back in my day, I could get this for, and you're going to say that when we're all grandparents.
Right.
Inflation, prices increase. You've got to keep it current and you got to hold your value on your service. Because if you are a discount service provider, you are telling the world that I'm a discount service provider, which is fine because you think I'll make it up in volume, but that's why you're burning out. The second you take pride in your deliverable and hold yourself to say, no, I provide a remarkable service.
Right.
I have the training. I've been certified. I have the special hair that only I can offer. And look how beautiful it's going to transform you to and make you feel amazing.
Yeah.
You've earned the right to ask for the amount that you need to earn.
It's tricky though because it takes reps. Anytime you do a price increase, I think there's this element of like, oh my God, I'm going to have clients drop off. So we're human. And so we have this. And it's like, once you do it once though, you're like, oh, this is logical. This makes sense. And so it makes something as simple as doing a price increase. You're like, yeah, I did it last time. I was a little uncomfortable with a few people, but look what I built from there. So I think I realized that like right out of the gate when I started playing around with pricing and things, it was like, I still to this day remember one day I was doing colors and I was like, to make the numbers work to just do colors and not extensions, I have to like double my color price. And so I had a few clients, I'm like, sorry, next time it's going to be, X, Y, and Z. And they're like, it's double. I'm like, yeah, that's what I have to do in order to make what I'm making with extensions. And they were like, okay, I still want to book. And I was like, oh, so I think once you do that once, it becomes less emotional for the artist or the entrepreneur. And you're like, hey, this is what I have to do to keep the doors open, to stay in business. And ultimately, I always tell entrepreneurs or mothers, especially, I'm like, hey, if you're saying yes to that client, you're saying no to your kids right now. And that's a hard pill to swallow. And when I put that frame on them, they're like, you're right, I'm going to cancel these clients and I'm going to increase my prices. I'm like, thank you,
And look, don't feel bad at home or on the road or even here. I have, and you have, we still go through that. I've sold and made tons of money, and then I started speaking, and I was speaking for free, and then it was like, what do you charge? I'm like, well, I'm
don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to.
This is new.
Yeah. And then it was one of my mentors, David, he said, you need to charge more.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I'm going to charge 10,000. And he's like, that's too low.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, but I don't. He's like, it's just too low.
Yeah.
The value is there. And you can always accept less. So then it was like, okay, 25,000. That's too low.
Yeah.
Okay, 50,000. And then it's like, well, I don't have a budget for 50,000, Jeff, but would you take 20? Well, guess what? 20 is still higher than 10.
Yeah, you're like, okay,
where I would have started. And it goes whether if you start at $1,000.
Right.
So, and it works for anything, your service. If you went to your community and said, I'm going to have to increase my prices. I have overloaded with clients and I have limited slots. And so I wanted to, I'm going to have to increase my prices 50%. Oh, you know what, Danielle, that's just too much. I can't afford it. Then you have the right there to say, you know what, Jeff, you've been a great client. I'm not going to do that to you. What can you afford? And if you're afraid, if you need to make yourself have that conservative parachute, if you will, you have the opportunity to go back to them and make them feel like they're getting a deal because they are, and not burn all the boats because you overpriced it.
It's so crazy what you even just said, though. I think that sometimes, a lot of times, we underprice ourselves based off our current skill sets. So you're like, well, I'm not like a big speaker, but you almost devalue all this other stuff you've created. And same thing with artists. They're like, oh, I don't want to charge up. I'm like, but why? You have 10 years of experience. Like, you need to charge this. And it's still kind of scary the first time you put it out there. But I'll tell you, if somebody priced me, like, say I was going to get my hair done and somebody was like, oh, they have this beautiful Instagram, this beautiful marketing. And if I go to them and they're like, oh, it's only $500 to get my extensions, and I immediately be like, that's offensive. See you later. No matter how pretty their marketing is, because I expected them based off their beautiful marketing and their skills that I can see. I was expecting in my mind to already pay $4,000. So the fact that they said $500, I'm like, oh no, this is a scam.
Yeah, or just two discount.
Yeah, I can't. I'm like, this is not lining up. So sometimes people undervalue or they charge too little, and it's like, well, what have you created and how long have you had your craft or whatever it is? And then, like you said, like, I'd almost rather charge a little bit higher. And I've done that one time. I had a shadowing program and it was a new in my brand, and people were paying like $1,000 for shadowing, and I was like, I'm gonna charge 10. And my husband looked at me, he's like, you're gonna charge 10? I'm like, yeah, what do I have to lose? And I ended up selling 10 shadowing programs at 10 grand a piece. And I was like, wow, like, you don't know unless you entertain that possibility.
And I have the same experience. The very first, so 2019 was the first time I ever got paid to speak. So 5 years ago. And I got $1,000. It was the first time. Because before that, I just always spoke for free. And when someone invited me, and it's like, okay, yeah, what do you charge? I'm like, $1,000. And then my mentor, that's when I started to have the conversation. Like, yeah, it's too low, it's too low. And then one day I said 10,000. And they said yes.
You're like, okay.
And that's when you start to realize, like, the value that you don't appreciate of yourself is worth it to others.
Right.
You own your own knowledge, your own skills. So to you, it doesn't feel as valuable. But to somebody who is searching for the answer, what would they pay?
It's invaluable.
It's invaluable. Because if you can help me make an extra $100,000 a year as a hairstylist, $10,000 is cheap.
Right. Exactly.
Oh my God, really? I'm going to 10x that return?
Right.
I would have paid you $75,000 to make I mean, if you guarantee me 100, you could charge me up to 90.
Right.
I'm making an extra 10 grand. It's guaranteed. Now, there's no guarantees, but that return is capable. That opportunity is there. And so that's where it starts to realize that we have to believe and own and cherish our own skill set and put real value on it, regardless of how simple we may think it is.
Right.
And the second we do that, we increase the revenue we start to make, which opens doors for us to hire and bring in resources in areas that we're not strong.
Right.
Because a lot of solopreneurs, the entrepreneur who has no staff, so a lot of hairstylists fall in that category, where they own their business, but they don't have anyone else.
Right.
So they're a solopreneur. It's really hard to be great at sales and marketing and accounting and finance and advertising and product development and source properly. And it's a lot of stuff. I mean, I have a big team of people working to do these things for a restaurant, right? Like, it's hard for a single chef. It doesn't matter what craft you're in. And money, resources is tools.
Right.
And people who say, well, I'm not driven by money. It's not about the money. It's what the money can give you. Right. Because the more you charge for your services gives you more tools to innovate and add more value to the entire industry that you're already serving.
Right.
And the more money that the stylists and the artists make gives them more money to bring in resources to say, you know what, I'm not a great marketer. Let me go hire somebody to help me with my social media. And now they can stay behind the chair where they want to be an artist, surround themselves with the skills they don't have, and now they all of a sudden are growing and scaling.
How do you do that so well? I feel like even for me, I didn't have an assistant until I was like 10 years in. And I'm like, why am I working so hard? Why don't I just hire an assistant? So it took me a while to even realize, like, oh, wait, I need people to help me manage all these lanes that I know enough about, but I don't need to do all this. How do you do that with your business? Does it seem, I mean, you have a large team. How does it start?
Well, it starts with realizing where you're weak, right? And self-identifying and saying, okay, I'm an artist. If I was a hairstylist, I'm an artist. I'm not really good in the sales and marketing side. Okay. So now explore what's available out there to help you. Is there a marketing service that caters to the hair industry? Is there a social media agency that can help you? Okay, it's $3,000 a month. I don't have that. Great. I now have a target. I need to make an extra $3,000 a month.
To pay for this.
To pay for this. So now, what can I do to make $3,000 more a month?
Yeah.
And now I work backwards into saying, how do I do that? And that's where solopreneurs get stuck.
Yeah. Because they're like, I can't afford that, instead of saying, how can I afford that?
Correct.
Oh, I just need 2 more clients in the door, and then it pays for itself.
And then once you do that, it adds $100,000 a year in revenue. So now you've made more money because you invested. Because we all forget, and it's true for everybody. Sometimes we forget these are called investments. And when you invest in learning like your method, that's not a cost.
Right.
It's an investment.
Exactly.
It's a cost if I do it because I don't have a hair business. So if I'm doing it because I just want to learn how for fun.
It'd be weird. I mean, you'd save your wife some money, If
she'd let me do it. I think she enjoys going, and she has, it's a whole day. But that's a cost, right? But as a hairstylist, it's an investment because I can take that skill and monetize it forever.
Right.
So it's not an expense. It's an investment, and we've got to invest in ourselves and our business all the time.
Right.
Mentors, coaches, masterminds, education, product learning. And if we stop doing that, that's where we get stuck behind the chair. That's where we get stuck not growing a business and failing. And it's so important to me with the show to bring on, extremely successful people like yourself, that there's no linear path to figuring it out. Some people go to college and Harvard Business School and they've been on the business track forever. Okay, but that's not the majority of us, right? The majority of us fell into entrepreneurship, didn't even realize we were in it, wanted to be in it, and struggled mightily until somebody kind of showed us the light.
Yeah.
And we all have that knowledge. Like, think of it like school. You go in a math class, the teacher teaches you something, and now you know how to do algebra or division or addition or whatever it is. Spanish, you learn from a teacher. It's true, and we're adults, we stop learning. And that's why I love your education component on top of your product component, because, and I'm going to say this because I don't think it gets enough credit, you're also a mom of 5 children, which means you have it harder than someone like myself, because I'm not a mom, and moms have a harder role inside traditional homes than the dad. And you're able to not use all those excuses as to why you couldn't figure that out, even though you were also behind the chair. You
know what? It's interesting that you touch on that, because I had a moment probably like 10 years ago where I was like, oh, I need to do the mom thing. I'm being selfish. And I almost had this like overwhelming feeling of like, you would be selfish to stop. And I was like, whoa. And it was like one of those moments where your mind and heart connect and you're like, okay, well, if that's the truth and I'm kind of living in this mom guilt, then how can I build my business and be a mom? And so that's what I did. And I still love being a mom. I joke around all the time. I'm like, full-time moms don't get enough credit. Like, I tried that for a minute and I was like, whew, that is a lot of work. So although, people are like, hey, you have 5 kids and how do you do all this? I manage it based off the outcome that I'm looking for. So I am and I think we talked about this on my podcast, it's not necessarily, moms think of being with their kids in sense of like time. And I'm like, I'd rather have connecting moments, because if I'm just putting in time with my kids, if I'm working on stuff, which I'm always working on stuff, they're going to remember mommy on her phone all the time. And I don't want my kids to remember that. Instead, I might be working on my business and then I'll put my phone away and I have like an hour lunch with my daughter or whatever it is. And that's what I want my kids to remember. So it's interesting, although I have family, it can be done. And I preach this to women all the time. I'm like, it's all about your priority and what you choose to create for yourself.
That's right.
And so I feel like I will say with my husband, I'm like, well, if I had 60 hours to put it in my business too, I'll tell him stuff like that. But the truth is, I don't want to work that much. I love being a mom, but I also love having my passions and purpose beyond that. So for me, it's like, okay, I can do it both. Does it mean it's necessarily moving slower? No, but I think that entrepreneurs or mothers, you're going to have seasons of hustle where you're like, okay, I need to like create some shit right now. And then you're like, ooh, I'm kind of burnt out and I'm feeling like a shitty mom. I probably should reel it back in a little bit. So that's just kind of like for me, and like even talking to women entrepreneurs, I'm like, you can create whatever you want. And just because you're a mom doesn't mean that you can't be successful.
No, and I'm so glad you mentioned that you had that moment of consideration of, well, can I invest in my own business because I'm a mom? And I'll never forget, I was 24 years old. I was starting my first company. I was quitting a 6-figure job, about selling my house and moving my fiance and daughter into my parents' house. And my dad pulled me aside because I'd already quit being a sports agent after law school and now quitting a 6-figure job to do what? And he said, you don't have the privilege of chasing crazy dreams. You're a dad. You have a family to support. He's right, but he's wrong.
Right.
And I had a moment in my life, and I'll preach this to the day I die for every parent. I said to him, I agree that I have a child and I have responsibility, but I disagree that I don't get to show them how to go after what they want in this world and settle. Because children emulate their parents. They don't listen to your parents.
Right.
Anyone who has kids, your kid ain't listening. They're emulating. Parents who smoke, kids are more likely to smoke. Healthy parents, kids are more likely to be healthy.
Right.
You know, the children who have parents of domestic violence tend to be in domestic violence situations, good or bad. They feel and emulate. So if my child sees dad settle or mom settle because we're moms and dads, which is a path I want for my kids, and that means they give up on who they are, what their pursuit of their greatness is, and living in their greatness and chasing their passions, then guess what? When they become parents, they're going to do the same thing.
Right.
Instead of watching mom or dad shine and juggle and go after what they want, accomplish it while still being a good quality parent.
Right.
And you said it best. Kids don't remember how much time you spend with them as long as you're spending quality time with them. I can't remember. My dad worked 60 hours a week. My mom was a full-time, and we had a live-in housekeeper who raised me in a lot of ways. I don't remember much with her.
Oh, really?
I still remember going to the game with my dad and my mom teaching me in the quality time because it's my parents, right? Had they been there the entire time, I'd still remember those moments.
Yeah.
So it's about remembering that most of the young child's life is for us. I get the enjoyment of hanging out with my 2-year-old and 3-year-old. They're not going to remember that.
Right.
You know, but you're shaping them. And so it's how do you juggle? And that's why I think it's harder for moms because society places more emphasis on mom's role, right?
Right.
And I jokingly always say, you know, there's no one sitting in jail because someone said something about their dad.
Yeah.
You know, dads are great, and I'm a dad, and we have a vital role, and it's essential for a child, but there's a special connection, obviously, with a mom, and moms are leaned on heavier. And so I hear a lot of moms holding themselves back because of this glass ceiling.
Yeah.
And I love that you plowed through it, and you don't have 1 child or 2 children. You have 5, which means you have a lot of extra required of you.
Yeah. What's crazy, too, is I don't think, because this was before my brand started to take off a little bit, and I think I was limiting even my business by saying, like, no, my priority is my kids. And I was like, why can't I have both? And so me kind of making that switch, I was like, oh, you know, you can do both. And in fact, by abiding by those rules or saying like, and again, I love the shit out of my kids, but by saying like, oh, my kids come first, like they do, but the business depends on what fire you're putting out.
That's right.
So for me, I just kind of was like, okay, like I need to let go of this mommy guilt because in a way it's holding what I can do in my business and then who am I going to impact? And so whenever I hear a mom that's in that space, I'm like, think about who you're not impacting. And that's really the goal. And like you just said, like your kids are going to watch that and they're going to be like, wow, mom or dad, like, look how many people they impacted. And then they're going to go on to do big things. And so when I kind of got that for me, I was like, oh, okay, great. Let's go.
And one mental exercise I use, if it's helpful for anyone listening to do that, is I have 2 daughters. I have pets and I have businesses. My pets and my businesses are like my other children.
Yeah.
They don't take priority over my actual children, but they're right behind them. So if my kids are fine and safe and at school and my dog needs to go to the emergency ER, I'm taking my vet. Exactly. I'm taking my dog. If my business is under duress, I'm handling my business. Obviously, if one of my children need me, it's the priority trumps everything.
Right.
But a lot of times your kids aren't under duress.
All the time, yeah.
So that means that's where you got to go to the squeaky wheel. You've got to think of your business as a kid. And when it's a newborn, brand new, it's like a newborn phase. You're not going to sleep much, and it's crazy.
Right.
But the other kids are still in the house. If you have multiple children, you know you're putting all your attention on the newborn, but the other kids still need you.
Right.
And then there's seasons. Like you said, there are times where the business is optimized, and now you put more emphasis on your children because they need you. And when you start to think of it that way, it allows you to remove the guilt.
Exactly.
And I hope that more, especially moms, but moms and men and dads, stop thinking that they can't pursue their dreams because they have children. It's the wrong way to look at it, in my opinion. It's you're teaching them the wrong thing. Because you would tell your child, you can do anything you want. I want the world for you. And if they said, well, mom or dad, I'm thinking about not doing that because I want to have a family, you would say, well, you can have both.
Yeah, exactly.
You would tell them to have both.
Yeah.
So you've got to emulate and be the example that you want for them. And I think too often we get into this scarcity mindset of I'm a bad dad because I worked 60 hours this week, or I have to travel for this thing. And yes, they want to be with me, and yes, I want to be with them. But I have more. My first job as a dad is to make them into great adults.
Right.
I want to be their friend, but that's second.
Yeah.
And that's how my view on parenting.
Well, you even shared with me on the podcast we did, you're like, yeah, being a lawyer, you're traveling all the time. And so you're like, well, I have the power to change this, right? Yes. And so it's like when you understand you can create whatever you want, then it allows you to, like, if I feel the guilt, I'm always like, oh, okay, I need to spend a little more time. It's like a friendly reminder now. I'm like, oh yeah, I haven't seen my teenager in like 5 days. Maybe I should go take her to lunch or something. But it's tough, but I wouldn't have it any other way. And like I said, when I kind of like let my businesses just go on autoplane, I was like, oh, this isn't what I want either, because I do believe that everybody needs to have like this passion and this purpose, because that's how we live and we grow and we impact. So yeah, I love it. It's fun. I'm still looking for the next chapter in my business, because I'm like, you're never done.
Sure. Well, I think you've kind of started with the relaunch of your show.
Yeah.
Which I think that pivot from just focusing on hair to now entrepreneurship is going to be so well received in your industry of expertise. Not your entrepreneur expertise, but I'm talking about in the hair industry, because if you can be the voice, and I think you're the great spokesperson for it, to push that industry and those who are living that industry to realize that they're entrepreneurs, and to get exposed to outside thinking, right? Because you can learn so much from people outside of your industry and how they do things. That's how innovation happens inside. Right. I mean, anyone who watched Karate Kid, he paints a house to learn the moves. Like, you don't do it by trying to fight, you do it by doing something else.
Right.
Those skills, what you're bringing on and how you're doing that, I think is going to ignite so much more creativity for you in ways that we can't sit here and figure that out yet.
Right.
And I think it's going to actually add the impact to your industry, which, you know, as you said at the beginning, is something that is meaningful to you. But you also have another show, which I'm fascinated with, the Date Your Wife podcast, because as a married man, I know how
challenging marriage can be.
Yeah, challenging, but interesting that show could be.
Yeah.
What was kind of the impetus behind that?
So Garrett created a Wake Up Warrior, that's his brand, and it's body, being, balance, and business, but he's always been talking about what he's going through, why he's going through it. And he's very transparent. And so I'm like actually the type of person that's like, whoa, like don't talk about that. Like don't air your dirty laundry. People don't want to hear about that. And I realized like marriage is a sticky conversation. And what I also realized is so many couples are going through the same stuff, but nobody talks about it. And so we literally started this podcast like just thinking like, let's see where it goes. And some of our podcast stuff, we were like fighting the whole time. And I'm like, should we air that? Like, did anybody get any value out of that? But what was funny is people would comment back and be like, hey, thank you for sharing that. Like, thank you for staying in the fight. Like, I totally get it. And so when people started to give us this feedback of like, oh my gosh, we're going through the same thing, I'm like, okay, I got a little bit more transparent. And now like when people ask me something, I'm like, I might cry, but like, I'll tell you what you need to know, because I know that you might be going through the same thing and it might help you. So I'm willing to throw myself under the bus if it helps. So that's kind of why we started this podcast. And then it actually almost like helped our marriage in a way, because as busy entrepreneurs, like we'd do the date night, but it was like sometimes we weren't super present. We'd have a couple of cocktails, go home, go to bed. Like it was just like putting in the date night as a check net.
Yeah.
And I was like, why aren't we communicating? Why aren't we talking? And it was funny because doing the podcast in the beginning, it allowed conversations to open up, but we wouldn't let them get too heated because we're like airing in front of people. So in a way, I was like, that was kind of like a therapy session.
Yeah. Almost like a controlled fight.
Yes, it was like a controlled argument. And now I feel like our marriage is in a good space. And so we've been bringing more couples on and like letting them share like where they're at in marriage and struggles they face, a lot of entrepreneurs. And it's been really good. And I don't even know where we're going with this podcast, to be honest with you. It's like one of those things you're like, you feel called to share and start and you don't know where it's going to go. And so we both have our individual brands, but we wanted to share like, hey, we're not perfect. Like, despite my Instagram feed, like we go through real shit like couples do. So we just started talking about life and struggles and having other couples on, and it's been fun, if anything, and helped kind of reconnect and in our marriage in a way.
And I think it's another area that is, as you said, it's just not being discussed. As an entrepreneur, I would say the hardest thing for a lot of entrepreneurs is the relationship they have with their spouse, because your kids and business are easy to address with the fires,
right?
And easy to address with what you're focused on,
right?
But the fact that your partner, your spouse, in these examples, they're not in the fight with you every day on the business side, and so what they may feel is that you're always gone. You put the business first. What you feel is you're out here trying to provide for the family and make this thing happen, and so both are right. But in the heat of it,
you don't see it.
You're both right. It's like that meme, you see the 6 and the 9, and one person's on either side, and it's like 6, no 9, no 6, no 9. You're both right.
Right.
Just need to get on the same side, and then you can agree.
Exactly.
And so I think that it's well needed in this space, and a lot of entrepreneurs hide that. And it's because it's a vulnerability in an area that maybe we don't feel like we're experts.
Yeah.
We don't know how to ask for help in those areas or expose it. And I know I could definitely, I'm going to be listening to a bunch more. I listened to a couple in preparation, and I'd never heard it before until we met. And now I'm a fan.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I'm thank you again as an entrepreneur for sharing that, being vulnerable for the rest of us, because I think it's opening eyes, perspective, and insight in an area that nobody's really doing.
Well, and I think too, just to touch on the how you said, like, men go out and they work, and then the women are like, no. I noticed there's a lot of resentment that builds up for women, and so this is like one of the big things. I'm like, hey, I want to be a voice for women to be like, hey, like you're working a lot, and I appreciate that, but where can we create time and space? I feel like it's women's obligation to create that connection with their husband. And so for me, I'm like, you've got to let go of that resentment. And so I went through it for like years. And so that was one of the things that I feel like I have a voice inside of being married is like, hey, you guys both want to be on the same team. You're building up this like wall for no reason. Both of you want the same thing, and it's all comes down to communication. So like I said, it's been one of those things where I'm like, I'm not an expert, but I have been married for 21 years. I have 5 kids, and we're still together. So I'm like, well.
And let me add a couple other accolades, because I think that you hit on some of them, but you also are a very successful entrepreneur, as is your husband. And so you have the demands, both of you, as that would come already is a full-time gig without 5 kids and a 21-year marriage and the travel.
I joke around with him. I'm like, we're chasing our 2-year-old and our 5-year-old the other day. And I'm like, you did this. You realize this. You did this. I'm like,
this is your fault.
This is your fault. I'm like, what kind of crazy people are we? But, I wouldn't have it any other way. So.
Well, I want to, seriously, you are an inspiration.
Thank you.
And you should get more into the mainframe of society and continue that voice, because you are an example for a lot of moms, and they need it. And, a guy like me can't be that. You have the success to go with it, to prove that your model works. You're innovating, disrupting, and you're humble in the fact that you realize, like, I learned these things just in time, and so can you, like, which makes it relatable.
Right.
And that's what I love the most. Again, we just got the privilege to hang for the first time last week, but and I got to be on your show, and I really appreciated the opportunity. But listening to your podcast and, you and your husband's, and then, I don't know your husband very well, but we've met a couple of times, and obviously I see him, and we've spoken on similar events. But you guys are killing it in all these areas, and so often we hide the areas that we struggle in, that personal side, the relationship side, the mom and dad side. I mean, 5 kids, I have 2, and they're 6 years apart, and I can't imagine having 5.
Yeah.
Like, I really can't. I'm like, the fact that you guys have a 2 and a 5-year-old right now, I'm just like, my youngest is about to be 13, and I look at my wife sometimes and I go, some of my friends, because, they have young kids. I'm like, I don't know how they're doing it right now. I'm tired.
Yeah. We have that conversation a lot, but I'm like, well, we're for sure done now. So it's good.
Are we?
We're for sure done now. Yeah.
All right. Well, you never know.
Oh, no, we know he snipped.
Okay. Fair enough. Then you're for sure done. But I want to also say that in your education space and how you're helping a large population of America, which are entrepreneurs that don't realize it. And I think that if I could suggest that you lean deeper into that in any way you can, because the impact you will make when you open the eyes of the hairstylist and the artist, that when they realize they're an entrepreneur and change their financial life and what that will do for their family, their business, and just their overall feeling of self-worth and confidence. Right. It's ripe. And I would say that you are in a great position to do that, and I know it would mean a lot to you. So thank you for everything you're doing, and thank you for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me on the show. It was great. It was fun to get to know you more and share a little bit of my story. I'm sure we'll connect down the path. I still want to pick your brain about so many things. I'm like, okay, I feel like I've like started, but now I'm like restarting again. So I'm excited for the next chapter and see where the wind blows me. Or maybe we literally movers are at my house right now, and I'm like, I'm going to do a podcast. They're like, you're leaving? I was like, yeah, but it'll be good. We're headed to Miami a week from. Well, like a week. In a week. Yeah. We head to Miami.
So I'm going to hang out with you when I go to Miami.
Yeah, and let's do it. It'll be great. Yeah.
Yes, and we'll continue to do some awesome things together. And I'm always a resource. Like the entrepreneurship community, we're a fraternity of men and women that are trying to do our best. Yeah. And I can learn from you, and you can learn from me, and we can all learn from everybody. And I try to make myself available anytime to people who are on the entrepreneurship journey, because most of what I know, I've learned. Yeah. I didn't create everything that I know. It's things that I've picked up, lessons I've learned, and if I can share and help other people do it, the world becomes an amazing place. And that's the impact. Yeah. That's the impact we all want to have. And I love building up entrepreneurs. I love having people achieve their financial freedom, their success, because success breeds more success. And it's going to create children. Their kids are going to see mom and dad killing it, and they're going to go kill it. And we can change the trajectory
of the world
because we are at this I believe we're at this place of mediocrity.
Yeah.
And that by accepting mediocrity because I'm a mom or a dad, you're creating mediocre kids that are going to have that same thing when you're all capable of so much more.
Yeah, exactly.
And we got to remove glass ceilings.
Yeah, well, there's like such a divide right now too. It's like people are like, I don't accept that. And so what you're doing is amazing because you're opening the eyes of so many entrepreneurs to say, you don't have to live there, you know, and it's all, and I'm feeling it's like more collaboration and not everybody just trying to do it on their own. So I appreciate what you're doing and who you are as a person too. And thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you. But before we end, we do a fun 3-question rapid fire. So you stare at a camera one.
Okay, I just got nervous. What are we?
I'm going to ask you 3 questions.
Okay.
And you answer it, 30 seconds.
All right.
Less, whatever. Okay. What is the biggest lesson you've learned from your kids?
Oh, that is such a loaded question. Well, I have 4 daughters, so the biggest lesson that I have learned from my kids is they're not yours to control and that you need to be very, very patient, especially having girls. And if they're blowing up on you, you just need to quietly go put yourself in mommy timeout.
What would you say is the definition of success?
Oh, that is, again, such a tricky question. So I used to say money, but now I would say the definition of success is not money. It's about having a passion, having a purpose, having something beyond just the money. And the money will come. But when you figure that out, opportunities are endless.
And finally, what's a moment in your career that changed your view of entrepreneurship?
My moment that changed my view of entrepreneurship was when I was at rock bottom. And when I felt that, I knew that the only way up was to accept this calling of not just being a hairstylist or not just being a mom, but accepting that I'm an entrepreneur. And although I don't have the skills, I will acquire whatever skills I need to become this person.
Well, you heard it right here. Isn't she a badass? I was honored to have you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing your story and those lessons. We can learn so much more. Tune in and watch both her shows. I highly recommend the Danielle K White show, but also
Date Your Wife.
Date Your Wife podcast, because I won't lie. I was kind of in a little trip. I'm going to listen to it because we were going to have this. I didn't know what I was going to get out of it.
Yeah, you never know.
Because I downplay sometimes that side, but it opened my eyes. Like I told you, like
when people listen, I'm like, you know too much about me.
but I didn't even realize that that's where it was going. I was thinking it was more like just a relationship podcast.
Oh, okay.
And in my head, I don't invest much effort in those areas, which I need to, and my wife will tell you I need to, and I should. But I kind of went in like, okay, this was more of like, I was interested in the entrepreneurship side, and that was more some homework, and it was fascinating.
Yeah.
And that's where that was that unexpected chasm change for me. So kudos to you and your husband for that, and definitely tune into that. And thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Hey everyone, first I want to thank all of you for tuning in. And if you guys haven't heard about my new book, Relationship Bank Account, click the link in the show notes or search the title on Amazon. This book is packed with all my secrets to success in both relationships and life. Make sure to pick up a copy, and if the book helps you on your journey, let us know by leaving a review. I appreciate all of you and can't wait to see you on the next one.